I should have known something was wrong when my own son started bringing me tea every morning with that strange, almost eager smile on his face. But mothers, we're blind to the monsters we raise, aren't we? My name is Margaret, I'm 73 years old, and I'm about to tell you how a doctor's secret note saved my life and led me to the most calculated revenge I've ever executed. But first, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened to me could happen to any mother, anywhere in this world. You know, when you've lived as long as I have, you think you've seen it all. You think you understand the people closest to you, especially the child you brought into this world. But sometimes the person trying to destroy you is sitting right across from you at the breakfast table, asking if you need more sugar in your coffee. If this story shakes you the way it still shakes me, please hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to share isn't just my story, it's a warning that every parent needs to hear. And if you've ever felt that cold realization that someone you trusted completely was betraying you, then you'll understand why I had to see this through to the very end. For 67 years of my life, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I'd been married to Harold for 43 years before cancer took him, and in all that time, I never once questioned his faithfulness. I raised 2 children, my daughter Sarah, who moved to Oregon with her family, and my son Michael, who stayed here in Millbrook, Ohio, just 20 minutes away from the house where he grew up. Michael was always the good son. The one who called every Sunday, who showed up to fix my leaky faucets, who brought his wife Jennifer and their twin daughters over for Sunday dinners. When Harold died 3 years ago, Michael stepped right into that protective role without me even asking. He started coming by more often, helping with my finances, insisting that I was getting too old to handle things on my own. At first, it felt like love. Pure, devoted love from a son who couldn't bear the thought of his mother struggling alone. He'd arrive every Tuesday and Friday with groceries, always knowing exactly what I needed before I even asked. He installed new locks on my doors for security. He convinced me to add his name to my checking account, just in case of emergencies. He even suggested I update my will to make things simpler for Sarah when the time came, since she lived so far away. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he orchestrated every single move. But then I just saw my devoted son taking care of his aging mother. The tea ritual started about 6 months ago. Every morning, Michael would arrive at exactly 8:30 with a steaming cup of chamomile tea with honey. He knew I'd been having trouble sleeping, and he insisted that the tea would help regulate my rest. He'd sit with me while I drank it, talking about his work at the insurance company, about the girls' soccer games, about how Jennifer was doing with her real estate career. Those mornings became sacred to me. In the loneliness that had swallowed my life after Harold's death, those 30 minutes with Michael felt like the brightest part of my day. I looked forward to hearing his key in the lock, to seeing his familiar face, to tasting that perfectly sweetened tea he prepared just for me. But the tea made me feel strange. Not sick, exactly, but foggy. Like I was living my life through a thick piece of glass. My thoughts moved slower. I'd forget conversations we just had. I'd lose track of time, sometimes finding myself sitting in my living room at 3 in the afternoon with no memory of how the morning had passed. When I mentioned this to Michael, he'd pat my hand gently and remind me that I was getting older, that some confusion was normal. He'd bought me a pill organizer and started managing my medications, carefully laying out my blood pressure pills, my calcium supplements, my vitamins for the week. He was so attentive, so concerned. He even scheduled my doctor's appointments and insisted on driving me to each one. Dr. Patricia Henley had been my physician for over 15 years. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, the kind of doctor who looked you straight in the eyes and told you the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. But over the past few months, I'd noticed her watching me differently during appointments. She'd ask the same questions twice, like she didn't trust my answers the first time. She'd study my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. 2 weeks ago, during what should have been a routine checkup, Dr. Henley asked Michael to step out while she examined me. He hesitated, something he'd never done before, and I caught a look that passed between them that I couldn't interpret. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt loaded with meaning I couldn't grasp. After he left the room, Dr. Henley's entire demeanor changed. Her questions became more pointed, more personal. She asked about my home life, about how I was feeling emotionally, about whether I ever felt confused or disoriented. She examined my eyes with a small flashlight for much longer than usual, and I saw something in her expression that looked like concern mixed with anger. When Michael returned, that professional mask slipped right back into place. She recommended some routine blood work, told me I seemed to be doing well for my age, and scheduled my next appointment. But as we were leaving, I caught her staring at Michael with an expression I'd never seen her wear before. It wasn't the warm, familiar look she usually gave to family members of her patients. It was cold. Calculating. Almost like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during that appointment. Something important had happened that I didn't fully understand. I found myself questioning the fog I'd been living in, wondering why my memory had become so unreliable, why I felt so disconnected from my own life. But Michael brought me my morning tea as usual the next day, and by the time I'd finished drinking it, those sharp questions had faded back into that familiar, comfortable haze. He told me he'd picked up my blood work results from Dr. Henley's office, that everything looked normal for someone my age. He was taking such good care of me. I felt guilty for even questioning his motives. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you couldn't see their darkness even when it was destroying you, you understand why it took me so long to realize what was happening. Love makes us vulnerable in ways we never expect. And sometimes, the people who exploit that vulnerability are the ones we die to protect. I was about to learn that Michael's protection came with a price I never could have imagined. The blood work appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and something about it felt different from the moment I woke up that morning. Michael had called the night before to confirm he'd pick me up at 10, but his voice carried a tension I'd never heard before. When I asked if everything was okay, he laughed it off, saying work had been stressful lately. But mothers know their children's voices better than anyone. There was something underneath that laugh that sounded almost excited. Like he was anticipating something that hadn't happened yet. I'd been feeling progressively worse over the past month. Not sick in any way I could define, but wrong. My hands shook more than they used to. My balance felt off, especially in the mornings after my tea. Sometimes I'd stand up from a chair and feel like the room was tilting, like I was on a boat in rough water. Michael attributed it to my age, to the natural process of getting older, but I'd been 73 for 8 months now, and this felt different than anything I'd experienced before. The morning of the blood work, Michael arrived with my tea as usual, but I noticed he was watching me drink it more carefully than normal. His eyes tracked every sip, and when I paused to comment on how the honey tasted different that day, slightly bitter underneath the sweetness, he quickly changed the subject to Jennifer's new listing in the expensive part of town. By the time we arrived at Dr. Henley's office, that familiar fog had settled over my thoughts like a heavy blanket. The waiting room felt overly bright, the sound seemed muffled, and I found myself struggling to follow the conversation Michael was making with the receptionist about updating my insurance information. When the nurse called my name, Michael stood to come with me, but she shook her head and explained that blood draws were quick and didn't require a family member. I saw something flash across his face, irritation, concern. Before I could identify it, it was gone, replaced by his usual warm smile. The blood draw itself was routine, but as the nurse was labeling the vials, I heard her mention something to Dr. Henley about additional tests. Through the fog in my brain, I couldn't quite catch what kind of additional tests, but Dr. Henley nodded grimly and said something about wanting to be thorough. When I rejoined Michael in the waiting room, he immediately asked what had taken so long. I told him about the extra tests, and I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He asked what kind of additional tests, but I couldn't remember the specific words the nurse had used. The harder I tried to recall the conversation, the more it slipped away from me, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. On the drive home, Michael was quieter than usual. Instead of our normal chatter about family and neighborhood news, he seemed lost in thought, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. When we pulled into my driveway, he sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, staring at my house like he was seeing it differently than he had before. That afternoon, something strange happened. For the first time in months, the fog began to lift. Not completely, but enough that I could think more clearly than I had in weeks. I found myself questioning things that had become routine, noticing details that had been sliding past me unexamined. Like the way Michael had started handling all my mail, sorting through it before I even saw it. Like how he'd convinced me to stop driving by pointing out minor mistakes I'd made, forgetting where I'd parked at the grocery store, taking a wrong turn in a neighborhood I'd known for decades. Like how he'd gradually taken over more and more aspects of my life under the guise of helping me manage my increasing confusion. But the most unsettling realization was how I'd been feeling physically. The shakiness, the dizziness, the memory issues, the way I'd lost almost 15 pounds without trying, these weren't normal signs of aging. I'd been healthy and sharp just 6 months ago. The decline had been so gradual that I'd accepted it as inevitable, but sitting in my living room with the clearest head I'd had in weeks, I began to wonder if something else was causing these symptoms. I decided to skip my usual afternoon nap and instead spent time going through papers Michael had been organizing for me. Most of it was routine, utility bills, insurance statements, correspondence from my bank. But tucked behind a stack of medical bills, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a copy of my will, the updated version Michael had helped me prepare a few months ago. But this wasn't the version I remembered signing. In the copy I'd kept in my memory, I'd left the house and the bulk of my savings to be split between Michael and Sarah, with smaller amounts going to my grandchildren. But this version left everything to Michael. Everything. Sarah's name appeared nowhere in the document except as a witness signature. I stared at that paper for a full 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I misremembered the contents? Had Michael explained the changes and I'd forgotten due to the fog I'd been living in? Or was this document something I'd never actually agreed to? The phone rang, interrupting my racing thoughts. It was Sarah, calling from Oregon for our weekly check-in. As we talked, I found myself mentioning the will, trying to gauge whether she knew about the changes. Her response sent ice through my veins. She had no idea the will had been updated at all. She thought the original version from 5 years ago was still in effect. When I described what I'd found, her voice became sharp with concern. She asked pointed questions about how I'd been feeling, about Michael's increased involvement in my affairs, about whether I'd been experiencing any health problems I hadn't mentioned to her. For the first time, I told someone about the fog, the confusion, the physical symptoms I'd been experiencing. As I described them out loud, they sounded less like normal aging and more like something else. Something deliberate. Sarah insisted that I see Dr. Henley immediately, without Michael knowing about the appointment. She offered to fly out to be with me, but I assured her I could handle one doctor's visit on my own. We agreed that I'd call her immediately after the appointment to let her know what Dr. Henley said. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling, every sound from the street outside, made me jump. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely afraid in my own home. But it wasn't fear of strangers or random violence. It was the much more terrifying fear that someone I loved completely had been systematically destroying me from the inside out. And the most chilling part was that I still couldn't quite believe it was true. Part of me kept insisting that there had to be another explanation, that my devoted son couldn't possibly be capable of what I was beginning to suspect. After all, who poisons their own mother? But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time to find out the truth. And if my growing suspicions were correct, I was running out of time in more ways than one. I called Dr. Henley's office first thing the next morning, before Michael's usual 8:30 arrival with my tea. My hands shook as I dialed, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. The receptionist initially tried to schedule me for the following week, but when I insisted it was urgent and mentioned that I needed to discuss my recent blood work results, she found an opening that afternoon. For the first time in months, I would be going somewhere without Michael knowing. When he arrived with my morning tea, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. Instead of drinking it immediately as I usually did, I told him I was feeling nauseous and asked if I could save it for later. I saw something flicker in his eyes, disappointment, frustration, but he quickly covered it with concern, asking if I needed him to take me to see Dr. Henley. No, I said, watching his face carefully. I think I just need to rest today. He lingered longer than usual, asking multiple times if I was sure I didn't need anything, if I wanted him to stay with me, if I thought I should see a doctor. Each offer felt less like concern and more like surveillance. When he finally left, I watched from my window as he sat in his car in my driveway for nearly 10 minutes, just staring at my house. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I poured the tea down the kitchen sink and called a taxi. Dr. Henley's office felt different when I arrived alone. Without Michael's presence filling the space, managing the conversation, answering questions on my behalf, I felt both more vulnerable and more alert. The receptionist seemed surprised to see me without him, asking twice if someone was coming to pick me up later. When Dr. Henley called me back to her office, I could see immediately that she'd been waiting for this conversation. She closed the door behind us with more force than necessary and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just professional concern, but personal anger barely held in check. Margaret, she said, settling into her chair, I'm going to ask you some very direct questions, and I need you to give me completely honest answers. The clarity I'd felt that morning intensified under her focused attention. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was really seeing me, really listening to what I had to say rather than dismissing my concerns as the confusion of an elderly woman. She asked about my symptoms in detail, when they'd started, how they'd progressed, what seemed to make them better or worse. She asked about my daily routine, my medications, my diet. And then she asked about Michael's involvement in my care. As I described how attentive he'd been, how he'd taken over so many aspects of my daily life, how he brought me tea every morning, I watched her face grow increasingly grim. When I mentioned that my symptoms seemed to ease on days when I didn't drink the tea, she leaned forward intently. Margaret, I need you to listen to me very carefully, she said. Your recent blood work showed some very concerning results. You have elevated levels of several substances that shouldn't be in your system at all. These substances can cause exactly the symptoms you've been experiencing: confusion, memory loss, physical weakness, tremors. The room seemed to spin around me as the implications of her words sank in. What kind of substances? The kind that someone would have to be giving you deliberately. This isn't something that happens naturally or accidentally. The words hit me like a physical blow. Hearing my worst suspicions confirmed by a medical professional made them impossibly, terrifyingly real. But even as shock coursed through me, a part of my mind was still struggling to accept that Michael, my Michael, who I'd nursed through childhood illnesses, who'd called me every Sunday for 20 years, could be capable of such calculated cruelty. Dr. Henley continued, her voice gentle but urgent. I've been suspicious for months, watching how you seemed to deteriorate so rapidly, how your symptoms didn't match any natural aging process I'd seen. But I needed proof before I could act on my concerns. What happens now? I managed to ask. Now we get you to safety, and we make sure this stops immediately. Margaret, based on the levels in your blood, this has been going on for a significant period of time. If it had continued much longer. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The full horror of my situation crashed over me like a wave. My son, my beloved son, had been slowly poisoning me for months. All those mornings sitting together, talking about his daughters and his work and his love for me, while he watched me drink something that was gradually killing me. But why? The question that had been nagging at me suddenly had an obvious answer. The updated will. The financial accounts with his name added. The gradual isolation from Sarah, from my own independence, from any life that didn't revolve around his control. Michael wasn't taking care of me. He was preparing for my death. And he was making sure that when it happened, it would look natural, inevitable, just the sad but expected passing of an elderly woman whose health had been declining for months. Dr. Henley was still talking, explaining about next steps, about contacting authorities, about getting me somewhere safe while they investigated. But I was only half listening. The other half of my mind was spinning with a revelation that surprised me with its intensity. I wasn't just devastated by this betrayal. I wasn't just heartbroken that my son had been systematically trying to kill me. I was furious. 73 years of life, 43 years of marriage, 2 children raised with every ounce of love I possessed, and this was how it ended? With my own son deciding that my death was more valuable to him than my life? As Dr. Henley outlined her plan for my immediate safety, I found myself thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about justice. About consequences. About making sure that Michael understood exactly what he'd done and exactly what it was going to cost him. But first, I had to survive long enough to see it through. And that meant Dr. Henley was right. I needed to disappear from Michael's reach before he realized that his plan had been discovered. What I didn't know was that Dr. Henley was about to take a risk that would change everything, a risk that would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the most complete and devastating revenge I'd ever imagined. Dr. Henley stood up and walked to her desk, pulling out a prescription pad. But instead of writing a prescription, she was writing something else, something that made her glance toward the door repeatedly as she wrote. Margaret, I'm going to give you instructions for getting to safety, but we have to be extremely careful about how we do this. If Michael realizes that we know what he's been doing, he might escalate his timeline. Do you understand what I'm saying? I nodded, though the full implications made me feel sick. If Michael knew his plan had been discovered, he might try to finish what he'd started before anyone could stop him. I'm going to schedule some follow-up tests for you, ostensibly to investigate your symptoms further. That will give us a legitimate reason for today's appointment if he asks. But more importantly, it will buy us time to get proper authorities involved and ensure your safety. She finished writing on the prescription pad, tore off the sheet, and folded it carefully. Then she did something that seemed strange at the time but would soon make perfect sense. Instead of handing the note to me directly, she walked around her desk and picked up my purse from the chair beside me. Let me just check to make sure you have your insurance card in here, she said loudly, her voice carrying in a way that suggested someone might be listening. She opened my purse, slipped the folded paper deep inside between my wallet and checkbook, and closed it again. Then she handed it back to me with a meaningful look. Everything looks good, she said. I'll call you with the test results in a few days. We went through the motions of a normal appointment conclusion. She walked me to the door, made polite conversation with her receptionist about scheduling my follow-up tests, and reminded me to call if I experienced any worsening symptoms. To anyone watching, it looked like a routine visit between a doctor and her elderly patient. But as I was leaving, I caught her eye one more time. The intensity in her gaze made me understand that whatever she'd hidden in my purse was crucial, and that I needed to read it as soon as I was safely alone. The taxi ride home felt longer than usual. Every red light, every delay, made me more anxious to see what Dr. Henley had written. But I forced myself to wait. If Michael was watching for me to return, if he was paying attention to my behavior, I couldn't afford to seem different or suspicious. When I arrived home, his car was parked in my driveway. My heart pounded as I paid the taxi driver and walked to my front door. Through the window, I could see Michael pacing in my living room. He met me at the door before I could even get my key in the lock. Mom! Where have you been? I've been worried sick. His voice was full of concern, but underneath it I heard something else. Something that sounded like barely controlled panic. I had an appointment with Dr. Henley, I said, trying to sound normal. I told you I was feeling unwell this morning. But I would have driven you. You know you shouldn't be going places alone. What if something had happened to you? For the first time, his protective concern felt suffocating rather than caring. Now that I knew what I knew, every word felt like an attempt to maintain control over my movements, my independence, my life. I just took a taxi. It was fine. He followed me into the house, hovering closer than usual as I set down my purse and removed my jacket. What did Dr. Henley say? Did she find anything wrong? She wants to run some more tests. Nothing urgent. I marveled at how easily the lie came out, how normal I sounded even though my entire world had shifted in the past few hours. Michael relaxed slightly, but I could see him processing this information, calculating what it might mean for his plans. What kind of tests? I don't remember all the details. Something about my blood work. He stayed for another hour, watching me more carefully than ever. When I mentioned feeling tired and wanting to rest, he seemed reluctant to leave. He made me promise to call him if I felt worse, reminded me that he'd be back the next morning with my tea, and insisted on checking all my door locks before he left. The moment his car pulled away, I grabbed my purse and found the note Dr. Henley had hidden inside. The paper was small, folded multiple times to make it as unobtrusive as possible. When I unfolded it, I saw her handwriting, usually neat and professional, but rushed and urgent now. Margaret, you are in immediate danger. Do not go home tonight. Pack only essential items and go to the Holiday Inn on Route 35. Ask for the room reserved under Patricia H. I've already called them. Do not tell anyone where you are going, especially Michael. Call me from the hotel at 555-0847. This is a matter of life and death. Trust no one else until we talk. I read the note 3 times, my hands shaking more with each reading. Dr. Henley wasn't just concerned about my health, she believed Michael posed an immediate physical threat to my life. The urgency in her words made it clear that she thought I might not survive another night in my own home. But even with the note in my hands, even with the blood test results confirming that I'd been poisoned, part of me still struggled to accept the reality of my situation. This was Michael. The boy who'd cried when our cat died. The young man who'd called me every week from college just to hear my voice. The father who'd named his daughter after me. How do you reconcile a lifetime of love with evidence of attempted murder? The answer, I was about to learn, is that you don't. You accept that people can change in ways you never imagined, that desperation and greed can transform even the most beloved child into someone capable of unthinkable cruelty. And then you decide what you're going to do about it. I looked around my living room, at the family photos covering every surface, at Harold's reading chair that I'd never had the heart to remove, at the quilt Sarah had made me for my 70th birthday. This house held 73 years of my life, every important memory, every moment of joy and sorrow that had shaped who I was. Michael was trying to take all of that away from me. He was trying to erase me from my own life, to steal not just my future but the security and peace I'd earned through decades of love and sacrifice. Well, I thought as I folded Dr. Henley's note and put it in my pocket, he was about to learn that his mother had more fight left in her than he'd counted on. And that some betrayals come with consequences he'd never imagined. I went upstairs to pack a bag, but I wasn't just preparing to run and hide. I was preparing to fight back. Packing a bag to flee from your own son is a surreal experience that I hope none of you ever have to endure. Every item I chose felt weighted with meaning. The photograph of Harold from our honeymoon, I might never see this house again to retrieve it. My mother's jewelry that I'd planned to pass down to Sarah, if Michael succeeded in his plan, he'd inherit everything anyway. The sweater Jennifer had knitted me last Christmas, she had no idea her husband was trying to murder his mother. But I forced myself to focus on practicalities. I packed 3 days' worth of clothing, my medications, important documents that Michael hadn't already taken control of, and the small emergency fund I'd kept hidden in my bedroom for years, money Harold had insisted I keep, just in case. I never imagined the case would be my own son trying to kill me. The hardest part was trying to act normal while I prepared to disappear. Every time a car drove past my house, my heart jumped, terrified it would be Michael returning for some reason. Every phone call, and there were 3 of them while I packed, might be him checking on me, growing suspicious about my behavior. By 6 o'clock, I couldn't delay any longer. Dr. Henley's note had said not to go home tonight, and something in her urgency suggested that waiting until morning might be too late. I called a different taxi company than I'd used earlier, not wanting to create any patterns that Michael might trace later. The Holiday Inn on Route 35 was a modest place, the kind of hotel that catered to business travelers and families passing through town. When I approached the front desk, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my identification. "I believe there's a room reserved under Patricia H." I said to the young clerk. She checked her computer and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Room 237. Dr. Henley called ahead and took care of everything. She said to give you this when you arrived." She handed me an envelope along with the room key. Inside the envelope was another note from Dr. Henley. "I'll be there at 8 p.m. Order room service for dinner, don't leave the room for any reason. We need to talk about next steps." Room 237 was clean and anonymous, with beige walls and generic hotel furniture. It should have felt safe, but instead it felt like a prison. I was a 73-year-old woman hiding in a hotel room because my own son wanted me dead. The absurdity of it was almost harder to bear than the terror. I ordered a sandwich from room service, though I had no appetite. Every bite felt like swallowing stones. I kept thinking about Michael discovering that I wasn't home, imagining his growing panic as he realized his careful plan was unraveling. Would he call the police to report me missing? Would he contact Sarah, feigning concern about my whereabouts? Would he figure out that I'd discovered his secret, and if so, how desperate would that make him? At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a soft knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Dr. Henley, still wearing her white coat, looking as exhausted as I felt. "Thank God you're safe," she said as soon as I opened the door. She entered quickly and immediately closed the deadbolt behind her. "I've been worried sick since you left my office." She sat in the chair across from me, and I could see the weight of what she was about to tell me in her expression. "Margaret, I need you to understand how serious this situation is. The substances in your blood, the levels we found suggest this has been going on for at least 4 months, possibly longer. Someone has been giving you small, consistent doses of a combination of drugs that, over time, would cause exactly the symptoms you've been experiencing." "What kind of drugs?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Benzodiazepines to cause confusion and memory loss, along with digitalis compounds that affect heart function. Administered together in small doses over time, they would cause a gradual decline that would look like natural aging and heart failure. Eventually, they would cause cardiac arrest that would appear completely natural in someone your age." The clinical precision with which she described my murder made it feel even more horrifying. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of desperate impulse. This was a calculated, methodical plan to kill me slowly enough that no one would question my death. "How long do I have?" I asked. "If you stop ingesting these substances immediately, your body should clear them within a few days to a week. The damage isn't permanent if we caught it in time." "But Margaret..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you had continued drinking that tea for another few weeks, I don't think you would have survived." The room felt too small, the air too thin. I was alive by accident, saved only because I'd finally gotten suspicious enough to see Dr. Henley alone. If I'd waited even a few more days to act on my concerns, would have died believing that my loving son was grieving my loss. What do we do now? I asked. Dr. Henley pulled out her phone. I've already contacted the police. Detective Sarah Chen from the Millbrook Police Department is going to meet us here in an hour. She's experienced with cases involving family members and... She paused, searching for the right words, domestic poisoning situations. What will they do to Michael? If they can prove what he's been doing, and I believe they can, based on your blood work and the timeline of your symptoms, he'll be charged with attempted murder. This isn't a misdemeanor, Margaret. This is a serious felony that could result in decades in prison. I should have felt relief. Justice. Satisfaction that Michael would face consequences for what he tried to do to me. Instead, I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away everything inside me and left just a shell. This was the child I'd rocked to sleep every night for the first year of his life. I'd taught him to ride a bicycle, helped him with homework, celebrated every achievement and comforted every disappointment. I'd been so proud when he graduated college, when he got his first job, when he married Jennifer, when his daughters were born. And all of that love, all of those memories, all of that history between us, none of it had been enough to stop him from deciding that my death was worth more to him than my life. But as I sat in that hotel room, waiting to give my statement to the police, I realized something that surprised me. Underneath the grief and the shock and the disbelief, there was something else growing. Something cold and calculating and absolutely determined. Michael thought he was so clever. He thought he'd planned the perfect crime, that he could kill his mother slowly and inherit everything while playing the part of the grieving son. He thought I was just a confused old woman who would never figure out what he was doing to me. He was about to learn how wrong he was. And before this was over, he was going to understand exactly what it felt like to have someone you trusted completely turn your entire world upside down. The police would handle the legal consequences. But I was going to handle something far more personal. I was going to make sure that Michael's betrayal cost him everything he thought he was going to gain, and quite a few things he'd never imagined he could lose. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at my hotel room at 9:15, a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and a demeanor that immediately made me feel like I was being taken seriously. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a small notebook and occasionally asking for clarification about dates or details. When I finished describing the past months of my declining health and Michael's increasing control over my life, Detective Chen closed her notebook and looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and personal anger. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that we take these cases very seriously. What you've described, combined with Dr. Henley's medical findings, gives us strong grounds for investigation and probable cause for arrest." She explained that they would need to move carefully to build an airtight case. They would analyze the remaining tea if I had any, search Michael's home and car for evidence of the substances found in my blood work, and examine his financial records to establish motive. "The challenge," she said, "is that poisoning cases can be difficult to prove in court. We need to establish not just that these substances were in your system, but that Michael was the one administering them, and that he was doing so with intent to cause harm." I told her about the updated will, about Michael's gradual takeover of my finances, about his insistence on being present at all my medical appointments until recently. Detective Chen's expression grew grimmer with each detail I provided. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something that might be difficult to hear. Are you prepared for what this investigation will do to your family? Once we arrest Michael, once this becomes public, there's no going back to the relationship you had before." The question should have been harder to answer than it was. 6 months ago, the thought of destroying Michael's life would have been unthinkable. But 6 months ago, I hadn't known that he was slowly murdering me while pretending to love me. "Detective Chen, my son has been poisoning me for months while looking me in the eyes and telling me he loves me. He's been planning my funeral while helping me update my will. He's been calculating how my death would benefit him while playing the role of the devoted son. I think he destroyed our relationship long before I found out about it. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll need you to stay somewhere safe while we gather evidence. Is there somewhere else you can go? Someone you trust completely? I thought about Sarah in Oregon, about how horrified she would be when she learned what her brother had been doing. But Sarah was also the only person I trusted absolutely, the only family member I knew hadn't been compromised by Michael's manipulations. I can call my daughter. She'll want me to come stay with her. That might be the best option for now. But Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand that we'll probably need you to help us gather evidence against Michael. Are you prepared to do that? The way she asked the question suggested she had something specific in mind. What kind of help? Well, he doesn't know that we know what he's been doing. He's going to be looking for you, probably getting increasingly panicked about your disappearance. If you were willing to contact him, to continue the pretense that you're unaware of his activities, it might help us gather evidence of his intentions. The thought of talking to Michael, of pretending that everything was normal while knowing he'd been trying to kill me, made my stomach turn. But Detective Chen was right, he would be looking for me, and his behavior while searching might reveal more about his plans and motivations. You want me to call him? We want you to consider it. With proper precautions, with us monitoring the calls, it could provide valuable evidence. But only if you feel comfortable doing it. I surprised myself by saying yes immediately. More than comfortable, I was eager to hear Michael's voice now that I knew the truth about him. I wanted to listen to him lie to me, to hear him perform concern while planning my death. I wanted to understand exactly how good an actor he'd become, and exactly how long he'd been practicing his deception. But mostly, I wanted to start gathering the information I'd need for my own plans. Because while Detective Chen was focused on building a legal case against Michael, I was already thinking beyond his arrest, beyond his trial, beyond his imprisonment. I was thinking about justice that went deeper than anything the courts could provide. Michael had tried to steal my life, my dignity, my peace, and my family's love. He'd tried to make my death look natural so he could play the grieving son while inheriting everything I'd worked for. He'd calculated that my love for him would blind me to his betrayal long enough for him to complete his plan. He was right about my love blinding me. But he was wrong about everything else. Over the next hour, Detective Chen and I worked out a plan. I would fly to Oregon the next day to stay with Sarah while the investigation unfolded. But before I left, I would call Michael and tell him I'd been feeling unwell and had checked into a hotel for the night, that I'd be home the next evening and hoped he could bring me my morning tea as usual. The plan was for me to return to Ohio after a week, supposedly from visiting Sarah, and resume my normal routine with Michael. I would drink the tea he brought me, but Detective Chen's team would have already replaced it with harmless substitutes. They would monitor my house, record our conversations, and document his continued attempts to poison me. It was dangerous, but it was also the surest way to catch him in the act and prove his intent to harm me. What Detective Chen didn't know was that I had no intention of simply being bait in their trap. I had my own trap to set, my own justice to serve, my own revenge to plan. Michael thought he was so clever, so calculating, so careful. He thought he could manipulate me without consequence, that he could kill me slowly and inherit everything while maintaining his reputation as the devoted son. He was about to learn that his mother had inherited more than just stubbornness from his grandmother. I had inherited a capacity for strategic thinking that he'd never suspected, and a willingness to see justice done that went far beyond what any court could provide. But first, I had to call him. I had to hear his voice lie to me one more time. I had to listen to him perform love while planning murder. And I had to start planting the seeds of his complete and total destruction. Detective Chen set up a recording device while I sat on the hotel room bed, staring at my phone and trying to prepare myself for what I was about to do. How do you call someone who's been trying to kill you and pretend that everything is normal? How do you listen to their voice and respond with love when you know they've been calculating your death? Remember, Detective Chen said softly, just act like you normally would. Don't try to trick him into saying anything specific. Just be yourself, be his mother, and let him do the talking. I dialed Michael's number at 10:30 p.m., knowing he'd be wondering where I was, probably driving past my dark house and growing more anxious by the hour. He answered on the first ring. Mom. Oh, thank God, where are you? I've been going crazy with worry. The relief in his voice sounded so genuine, so full of love and concern, that for a moment I almost doubted everything I'd learned about him that day. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I started feeling really unwell this afternoon and decided to check into a hotel for the night. I didn't want to worry you by calling so late. Which hotel? I'll come get you right now. You shouldn't be alone when you're not feeling well. The urgency in his voice could have been parental concern. Or it could have been panic that his plan was being disrupted. Now that I knew what he'd been doing, every word carried double meaning. No, I'm fine. I just needed some rest. I'll be home tomorrow evening. What kind of not feeling well? Are you having chest pains? Dizziness? Should I take you to the emergency room? Chest pains. Dizziness. The exact symptoms that the substances in my blood would eventually cause, the symptoms that would make my death look like natural heart failure. He was coaching me toward the narrative he'd planned for my demise. Just tired, Michael. Very tired. I think I need to sleep. Mom, I don't like this. You've been having so many health problems lately. I really think I should come stay with you tonight, or you should come stay with us. Jennifer wouldn't mind at all. Of course Jennifer wouldn't mind. Jennifer had no idea her husband was a would-be murderer. Jennifer probably thought Michael was being wonderfully attentive to his aging mother. I'll be fine, sweetheart. I just need one good night's sleep in a quiet place. I'll call you in the morning, okay? There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation without seeming too insistent. Okay, Mom. But promise me you'll call if you feel any worse. And I'll bring you your tea first thing in the morning, as soon as you're home. Your tea. The poison he'd been serving me every morning for months while watching me drink it and asking about my day. That sounds wonderful, Michael. I love you. I love you too, Mom. More than you know. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made my skin crawl. Because I was beginning to understand exactly how much Michael loved me. He loved me enough to kill me slowly rather than quickly, to make my death look peaceful rather than violent, to ensure that I never suspected his betrayal. In his twisted mind, this probably was love. After I hung up, Detective Chen and I listened to the recording together. She pointed out the subtle ways Michael had tried to control the conversation, how he'd pushed for information about my location and symptoms, how he tried to insert himself into my evening plans. He's definitely concerned about losing control of you, she said. The question is whether a jury will interpret that as natural worry about an elderly parent or evidence of something more sinister. But I was hearing something else in Michael's voice, something Detective Chen's trained ear had missed because she didn't know him the way I did. Underneath the concern and the love, there was something that sounded almost like excitement. Like anticipation. Michael wasn't just worried about me being away from home for one night. He was eager to get me back into his routine, back to the morning tea ritual, back to the slow, steady process of killing me. My brief absence had interrupted his timeline, and he was anxious to get back on schedule. The realization made me feel sick, but it also crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since Dr. Henley first showed me her note. Michael's eagerness to resume poisoning me meant he was close to achieving whatever endpoint he'd planned. Which meant I was running out of time in more ways than one. Detective Chen outlined the next steps of the investigation while I packed my few belongings for the flight to Sarah's house. They would spend the week gathering evidence, analyzing the tea Michael had been bringing me, searching his computer for research into the substances found in my blood, building a comprehensive case for attempted murder. But as I listened to her professional, methodical approach to justice, I found myself thinking about something entirely different. I was thinking about the 23 years since Harold died, about the loneliness that had made Michael's attention so precious to me, about how completely I'd trusted him with my life and my love. I was thinking about Jennifer and the twin granddaughters who called me Nana, about how Michael's arrest would destroy their lives too. They would learn that the man they loved was a calculated killer, that their comfortable life had been built on plans for my murder. But mostly, I was thinking about the will Michael had forged, about the money he'd already stolen from my accounts, about the reputation he'd carefully constructed as the devoted son while systematically destroying his mother. The courts would punish Michael for attempted murder. But they wouldn't address the deeper betrayal, the complete violation of everything a parent-child relationship should represent. They wouldn't make him understand what it felt like to be utterly deceived by someone you trusted completely. That was going to be my job. As Detective Chin drove me to the airport the next morning, I was already planning something that went far beyond legal justice. I was planning a reckoning that would strip away everything Michael thought he was going to gain from my death, everything he'd built his life around, everything that mattered to him. But first, I had to tell Sarah. I had to explain to my daughter that her brother had been trying to murder their mother, and that our family was about to be destroyed in ways none of us had ever imagined. If you've ever had to make a phone call that you knew would shatter someone's world, you know that the hardest part isn't finding the words. It's accepting that once you say them, nothing will ever be the same again. The flight to Portland felt endless, every minute stretching like an hour as I rehearsed how to tell Sarah that her brother was trying to kill me. How do you explain something so impossible that part of you still doesn't believe it yourself? How do you destroy a daughter's faith in her sibling while asking her to help you survive? Sarah met me at the airport with worry written across her face. At 45, she still had the same determined expression she'd worn as a child when she was trying to solve a problem beyond her age. She'd taken time off work, arranged for her teenagers to stay with friends, and cleared her schedule completely, all because her mother had called and said she needed to come to Oregon immediately but couldn't explain why over the phone. The drive to her house in southeast Portland was quiet, both of us understanding that whatever conversation was coming needed to happen in private, without interruption. Sarah's husband David was traveling for work, which meant we'd have the space to talk without having to manage anyone else's shock or questions. We settled in her living room with tea, and the irony of that simple domestic ritual wasn't lost on me, and I began the most difficult conversation of my life. I started with the symptoms, the gradual decline in my health and mental clarity, the way Michael had slowly taken control of various aspects of my life. Sarah listened without interruption, but I could see understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes even before I got to the blood work results and Dr. Henley's discovery. When I told her about the forged will, about the substances found in my blood, about Detective Chen's investigation, Sarah went completely still. Not shocked stillness, but the dangerous quiet of someone whose anger runs too deep for immediate expression. "That bastard," she finally whispered, and the venom in her voice startled me. "That calculating, greedy bastard." "Sarah." "No, Mom. Don't you dare defend him. Don't you dare tell me he's still my brother or that he's still your son or any of that family loyalty bullshit." She stood up and began pacing, her hands clenched into fists. "He's been poisoning you. Our mother. He's been sitting in your kitchen every morning, watching you drink something that was slowly killing you, and making small talk about his daughters." The fury in her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from my typically composed daughter. But underneath the anger, I could hear something else, guilt. "I should have known," she continued. "I should have paid more attention when you started seeming confused on our phone calls. I should have visited more often, should have questioned why Michael was suddenly so involved in your daily life. I let him have total access to you while I stayed 3,000 miles away. You couldn't have known. I should have known because I know Michael." She stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Mom, Michael has always been selfish. Always. Even as kids, everything was about what Michael wanted, what Michael needed, what was best for Michael. But I thought that was just personality, just being self-centered. I never imagined he was capable of murder. We talked for hours, dissecting memories and conversations, looking for signs we'd missed or red flags we'd dismissed. Sarah recalled phone calls over the past year where I'd seemed increasingly dependent on Michael, where I'd mentioned feeling grateful for his help with things I'd always handled myself. He was isolating you, she said. Systematically making you more dependent on him while making it seem like natural aging. And I helped him do it by staying away, by being grateful that someone was looking after you so I didn't have to worry. But as the evening progressed and we'd exhausted our analysis of how we'd missed Michael's plan, our conversation shifted to something else entirely. Sarah wanted to know about the investigation, about Detective Chen's timeline, about what would happen to Michael when he was arrested. When I explained that the police needed me to return to Ohio, to resume contact with Michael while they gathered evidence, Sarah's reaction was immediate and absolute. Absolutely not. You're not going back there. You're not putting yourself in danger so the police can build a stronger case against that monster. Sarah, it's the only way to prove what he's been doing. I don't care about proving it. I care about keeping you alive. She sat back down beside me, taking my hands in hers. Mom, listen to me. Michael has been planning your death for months, maybe years. He's demonstrated that he's willing to kill his own mother for money. Do you really think he won't escalate his plans if he gets desperate? She was right, of course. Detective Chen had mentioned the same concern, the risk that Michael might become more dangerous if he felt his plan was falling apart. But there was something else motivating my willingness to take that risk, something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself until that moment. Sarah, I don't just want him arrested. I want him destroyed. The words surprised both of us with their intensity. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a recognition of something in me that she'd never seen before. What do you mean? I mean that prison isn't enough. 20 years in a cell isn't enough payment for what he's done to me, to our family, to the trust and love I gave him every single day of his life. I want him to lose everything he thought he was going to gain by killing me. I want him to understand what it feels like to have someone you trust completely betray you in the most fundamental way possible. Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but determined. What did you have in mind? Over the next several hours, as Portland slept around us, Sarah and I planned something that went far beyond legal justice. We planned a comprehensive destruction of everything Michael had built his life around, everything he valued, everything he thought murdering me would protect or improve. Sarah's work in financial consulting had given her access to resources and knowledge that I'd never possessed. She knew how to trace money, how to document financial crimes, how to expose fraud in ways that would be impossible to hide or explain away. She also knew people, lawyers, investigators, journalists, who specialized in cases involving financial abuse of elderly family members. But our plan went beyond financial destruction. We researched Michael's employer, his social circle, his daughter's schools, his wife's real estate business. We identified every aspect of his life that depended on his reputation as a trustworthy, devoted family man. When this breaks, Sarah said, it won't just be a criminal case. It'll be a complete exposure of who he really is. Everyone who's ever trusted him, ever done business with him, ever considered him a friend, they'll all know that he spent months slowly poisoning his own mother while pretending to love her. We planned how to contact journalists who specialized in true crime stories involving family betrayal. We researched the insurance company where Michael worked, learning about their ethics policies and how they handled employees charged with serious crimes. We even looked into the private school his daughters attended, knowing that other parents would learn about their father's arrest and that the family's social circle would collapse. It was ruthless, comprehensive, and absolutely necessary. Michael had calculated that my love for him would protect him from consequences, that I was too old and confused to fight back effectively, that killing me slowly would give him everything he wanted while maintaining his reputation and relationships. He was about to learn how wrong he was about all of it. But first, we had to make sure he was caught in the act, documented and recorded attempting to poison me again. And that meant I had to go back to Ohio, back to my house, back to the morning tea ritual that he'd turned into a murder weapon. Sarah insisted on coming with me. "You're not doing this alone, Mom. If you're determined to see this through, then I'm going to be there to make sure you survive it." As I fell asleep in Sarah's guest room that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of power, of control over my own destiny. Michael thought he was so clever, so careful, so calculating. He had no idea what his mother was capable of when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. But he was about to find out. We returned to Ohio 5 days later, Sarah and I, armed with a plan that would have impressed Harold with its thoroughness and strategic precision. Detective Chin met us at the airport, briefing us on what they discovered while I was away. The tea analysis had confirmed our worst suspicions. Every sample they'd tested from my kitchen contained the same combination of substances found in my blood work. They'd also found evidence of Michael's research into these compounds on his work computer, including searches for undetectable heart attack drugs and natural-seeming deaths in elderly people. But the most chilling discovery was a timeline they'd found in his personal files, a spreadsheet tracking my symptoms and his assessment of my declining health over the past 6 months. He'd been documenting the progression of his plan like a scientist monitoring an experiment, noting which symptoms appeared on which dates, adjusting dosages based on my reactions. "It's premeditated murder, documented in his own handwriting," Detective Chin said. "But we still need to catch him in the act of administering the poison to make the case absolutely airtight." The plan was simple but dangerous. I would return home, call Michael to let him know I was back from visiting Sarah, and resume our normal routine. The police would be monitoring my house from multiple positions, recording everything that happened inside through equipment they'd installed while I was away. When Michael brought me the poison tea, they would have video evidence of him attempting to murder me. Sarah would be staying at a hotel nearby, maintaining contact with Detective Chen's team and ready to intervene if anything went wrong. She'd also begun implementing the other aspects of our plan, contacting journalists, preparing evidence packages for Michael's employer and social circle, documenting the financial abuse we'd uncovered. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she asked for the 100th time as we approached my house. "It's not too late to just let the police handle this without putting you at risk." But I was sure. More sure than I'd been about anything in years. Michael thought he could kill me slowly and inherit everything while playing the grieving son. He thought his reputation and his family life and his comfortable future were secure because I was just a confused old woman who would never figure out what he was doing. He deserved to learn exactly how wrong he was about all of it. I called Michael 20 minutes after arriving home, telling him I'd had a wonderful visit with Sarah but was exhausted from the travel and looking forward to getting back into my normal routine. He was effusive in his relief, telling me how worried he'd been, how much he'd missed our morning conversations. "I'll be there first thing tomorrow with your tea, Mom. I have so much to catch up on with you." That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump, every car passing on the street made me wonder if Michael had decided not to wait until morning. Detective Chen had assured me that they had surveillance on my house, that I was completely safe, but knowing that your son wants you dead makes it hard to feel secure anywhere. At 8:30 the next morning, I heard Michael's key in the lock. I was sitting in my usual chair in the living room, exactly where I'd been every morning for the past months when he arrived with my tea. For a moment, seeing him walk through my door with that familiar cup and saucer, I almost forgot what I knew about him. He looked the same. Same warm smile, same concerned eyes, same gentle demeanor that had made me feel so loved and protected. If I didn't know what I knew, if I couldn't see the recording equipment the police had hidden around my house, I would have felt nothing but gratitude for his caring attention. "Good morning, Mom. You look rested. How was your flight yesterday?" He sat in his usual spot on the couch, watching as I lifted the teacup to my lips. And that's when I saw it, the slight anticipation in his expression, the way his eyes tracked the cup's movement toward my mouth, the almost imperceptible tension in his posture as he waited for me to drink. He wanted me to drink it. He was eager for me to consume whatever he'd put in that tea. In that moment, seeing the hunger in his eyes as he waited for me to poison myself, I understood that Michael didn't just want me dead for my money. Some part of him was enjoying this, was getting satisfaction from the power he held over my life and death. I drank the tea, which the police had confirmed was harmless, having intercepted and replaced Michael's version before he arrived, and watched him relax as I consumed what he believed was another dose of my murder. We talked for 30 minutes about Sarah's family, about his work, about the upcoming school year for his daughters. Normal, loving conversation between a mother and son. Except that one of us was trying to kill the other, and both of us knew it. When he left, promising to see me the next morning, I called Detective Chen. "We got everything," she said. "Video, audio, the whole interaction. Combined with all our other evidence, this is going to result in a conviction for attempted murder in the first degree." But my work was just beginning. Over the next week, while the police finalized their case against Michael, Sarah and I executed our plan with surgical precision. We released carefully prepared information packages to local journalists, detailing not just Michael's attempt to murder me but the financial abuse, the forged documents, the systematic isolation he'd imposed on me over the past year. The story broke on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday evening Michael's life had completely collapsed. His employer suspended him pending investigation. Jennifer filed for divorce and moved the children to her parents' house. His neighbors avoided eye contact when he left his house. The parents at his daughter's school whispered when he appeared at pickup time. But the most devastating blow came when I filed a civil lawsuit against him, not just for attempted murder but for financial fraud, elder abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit detailed everything, every forged document, every stolen dollar, every lie he'd told while slowly poisoning me. Michael's arrest made the local news, but the civil lawsuit made national headlines. Son accused of slowly poisoning mother while planning her funeral, ran on CNN. The Perfect Son, a true crime story of family betrayal, was picked up by major magazines. Jennifer's real estate business collapsed as clients learned about her husband's charges. The insurance company fired Michael immediately and began investigating all his previous cases for potential fraud. His daughters, my granddaughters whom I love dearly, had to change schools when the story became too much for their original school community to handle. I felt terrible about what this did to Jennifer and the girls. They were innocent victims of Michael's choices, just as I had been. But Michael had calculated that his actions would only affect me, that he could murder his mother without consequences for anyone else in his life. He was learning that some choices create ripple effects that destroy everything they touch. The criminal trial took 8 months. Michael maintained his innocence throughout, claiming that I was a confused elderly woman who had imagined the whole thing, that the evidence was circumstantial, that he was a devoted son being railroaded by an overzealous prosecutor. But the evidence was overwhelming. The timeline on his computer. The research into poisons. The forged will. The video of him watching me drink what he believed was poisoned tea. The medical testimony about the substances in my blood. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Michael was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. I saw confusion in his eyes, and hurt, and something that might have been genuine surprise that his plan had failed so completely. I think, even then, Michael never fully understood what he'd done wrong. I think he genuinely believed that loving me while planning to kill me was somehow acceptable, that his need for my money justified his willingness to murder me for it. Standing in that courtroom, watching my son be taken away to spend the rest of his productive years in prison, I should have felt victorious. I should have felt that justice had been served, that my revenge was complete. Instead, I felt empty. Hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just a shell of a person who had once been someone's mother. Michael was in prison, but I had lost a son. He would spend decades behind bars, but I would spend whatever years I had left knowing that the child I had raised with infinite love had tried to murder me for money. We had both lost everything that mattered. The difference was that I had chosen my losses, while his had been imposed as consequences for choices he'd made. If you're watching this story and you have children, hug them tonight. Love them completely, but don't blind yourself to who they really are. Because sometimes the people we love most are capable of betraying us in ways that destroy not just our lives, but our faith in love itself. I'm 74 now, living in a small apartment near Sarah in Oregon. I'm healthy, the doctors say the substances in my system cleared completely with no permanent damage. I have friends, hobbies, a life that's my own. But I will never again trust someone completely. I will never again love without reservation. Michael didn't just try to kill my body, he succeeded in killing something essential about who I was as a person. That might be the cruelest part of his betrayal. Not that he tried to murder me, but that he made it impossible for me to ever feel safe being loved again. Sometimes I wonder if he understands that yet, in whatever cell holds him now. Sometimes I wonder if he's figured out that the real punishment for his crime isn't the prison sentence, it's living with the knowledge that he destroyed the most unconditional love he would ever receive in this world. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if that was actually the revenge I was looking for all along. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about trust and betrayal and the complicated nature of family love, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the people closest to us have the power to save us or destroy us. Choose carefully who you give that power to. From Portland, Oregon, this is Margaret, reminding you that some betrayals change us forever, but survival is its own kind of victory.